Hey, what's going on, guys? At UFC Vegas 82, Brendan Allen versus Paul Craig. We saw some atrocious performances, and I'm going to give you my opinion on who deserves to be cut from the UFC after their performance on this fight card. I'm going to start with some honorable mentions, then I'm going to jump into my actual list, saving last on the list for who I believe most deserves to be cut from the UFC. And believe me when I say this, number one is not only going to be unexpected, it's also going to be highly controversial as well, and I think a lot of people are going to disagree with me, but we'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. I want to go through these kind of rapid fire because honestly, I could have cut the entire card, and as many as I have on this list, the video could be an hour long. So let's start with the first honorable mention, and that is Dennis Tululin. He is 35 years old. He's lost his last 3 fights all by stoppage. Well, how come he isn't on the list? How come he's an honorable mention? Well, he took the fight on short notice. He took a fight against Christian Leroy Duncan on short notice. He gets finished brutally, but, I feel like he deserves one more chance just because he did take it on short notice. He's been fighting decent competition. He gets finished by Christian Leroy Duncan, got finished by Gregory Rodriguez, got finished by Young Park. So I feel like he took it on, a couple days notice? I think it was like 4 or 5 days notice. And he did okay. He didn't have the worst performance ever. So I feel like he should be an honorable mention. I don't think he should be cut just yet. Give him one more opportunity. Moving up on my list, I have Ailin Perez. Now, Ailin Perez beat Lucy Pudilova via decision, but this was such an ugly fight. I mean, she dominated the first 2 rounds. The full mount ground and pound was some of the worst ground and pound I've ever witnessed in my entire life. How was she even on the roster? She's right up there with Chelsea Chandler, essentially. I mean, she got a win over Ashley Evans-Smith, who hadn't fought in like 17 years, and she only won that fight via decision. On top of that, she gasses out and almost gets finished in the 3rd round. Then, even though she's completely gassed and almost gets finished in the 3rd round, she has enough time to get up and start twerking on the fence. And, I know she's trying to appeal to some of the UFC incel simp fan base, but, I mean, she has a horrible skill set. She's not good at all. She's fighting bottom of the barrel competition and barely squeaking by. She's an honorable mention only because she's on a win streak, but honestly, she's so low level. She really, years ago, it would have been laughed at to even suggest someone of Ailin Perez's skill level would be in the UFC. So that's why I put her on the honorable mention. Moving on to my next honorable mention. This person didn't even fight on the UFC card, but I had to include him. Bellator 301. And honestly, this person belongs on the cuts list. So you could, regardless, honorable mention just because they're not actually fighting for the UFC. But we need to cut Sydney Outlaw. Sydney Outlaw fought AJ McKee at Bellator 301. Literally, he did not fight. He did not fight. So that's the wrong term for it. He grabbed and held literally for the entire fight, throwing no shots at all. He had a lot of top control. Literally was not throwing punches. It was one of the worst performances I've seen in MMA history. So he needs to be out of a job. He got destroyed. Thank God the judges got it right, because even though he was getting takedowns, he wasn't doing anything. I can't even describe what he was doing, because a lot of people think, oh, he just laid on him. But, you hear people say that all the time and they're exaggerating. He literally just grabbed and held. That's all he did, is grab and held. He got butchered from the bottom. He lost the fight, essentially, even though he was on top of AJ McKee the entire fight, because he refused to throw any ground and pound. It was an embarrassing performance. So throw him on the list. And also on the list, we have Danny Sabatello. Danny Sabatello fought Rafion Stotts, lost via decision. He did the same thing. Now, I would actually have him as an honorable mention because his performance wasn't as disgraceful as Sydney Outlaw, because he did strike on the feet. But when he did grapple, he would get Rafion Stotts to the ground and not literally throw any shots at all. He basically did the same thing as Sydney Outlaw once he got to the ground. But Stotts was able to defend some takedowns. He was able to create scrambles, and it forced Sabatello to have to strike on the feet. He was throwing some head kicks. He was throwing some knees to the body. So I give him a little bit more of a pass for it, but still, he's done that in the past where he talks such a big game, and then all he does is go out there and grab and hold, and it's just embarrassing. And it's potentially the last Bellator card ever, and you leave, with that sour taste in your mouth of Danny Sabatello and Sydney Outlaw just grabbing and holding for the entire fight. Disgraceful. Cuts Danny Sabatello as well. Moving on to my actual list, and this is where it starts to get a little bit controversial. But first on the list, we have Paul Craig. Paul Craig lost to Brendan Allen in the main event. And honestly, people act for some reason like Paul Craig is some great fighter or he's some top-ranked fighter. He's not good. He's lost 3 out of his last 4, all by finish. Paul Craig is just a submission specialist. And he comes in with this crazy aggressive stare-off, like he's ready to kill someone, like he's ready to go to war. And then the entire fight, he basically pulls a Kron Gracie where he's dragging his ass all over the canvas. Now, that's an exaggeration for this fight because Brendan Allen was willing to go to the ground with him. And I know that's his best path to victory for Paul Craig. But, you know, the fact that he's 35 years old, he gets brutalized by Brendan Allen and then choked out. The fight before this, you know, he got a win over Andre Muniz. Muniz was winning and then gassed out himself, and Muniz isn't that good. Then the fight before that got destroyed by Johnny Walker. The fight before that got destroyed by Volkan Ozdemir, made it to decision but got pieced up the entire fight. I don't want to see Paul Craig fight anymore. I don't. I mean, he's just a jiu-jitsu specialist who's had moments in fights. I mean, he has some good wins. He's got a win over Jamal Hill. You know, he's got a win over Ankalaev, but these all have kind of been Hail Mary victories. I mean, the Jamal Hill, not really a Hail Mary because the fight just started, but they've all kind of been, I don't want to say fluky, but kind of lucky victories that he's just been able to pull off with his jiu-jitsu. And really long term, it's not going to work. And plus, he's getting older. He's slowing down. He doesn't have the striking ability. I mean, he has no striking ability at all. I mean, he doesn't even go to the Juliana Pena school of striking. That's how bad Paul Craig is on the feet. So Paul Craig really needs to retire. He should be more on the needs to retire list. But I mean, what are we going to watch him just get chinned and beat up for the rest of his life at middleweight? Or is he going to go back to light heavyweight? That's even worse for him probably. I think Paul Craig, it's time to get rid of Paul Craig. Moving up on my list, next up, we have Charles Johnson at flyweight. Charles Johnson is 13-6. He's 32 years old, and I kind of want to cut him some slack, but because he is kind of fun to watch. I think he is a decent fighter, but he's on a 3-fight losing streak. He lost to Rafael Estevam, had a competitive third round, even had a competitive second round. You know, there was an argument maybe to make that he could have won, but he just gets out-grappled every fight. He doesn't have the grappling ability to fend off some of these guys. I mean, Estevam, Cody Durden, he had a close fight with Ode Osborne, but if I'm not mistaken, I think Ode Osborne got kicked in the nuts like 3 times that fight, if I'm not mistaken. So his last win was against Jimmy Flick, who Jimmy Flick doesn't belong in the UFC, to be quite honest. So Charles Johnson, you know, 0-3 in his last 3, getting dominated for the most part in the grappling situations, at least in his last 2. I know he's fought some good competition, but flyweight's full of good competition. Plus, he has that ugly haircut, so we might as well get rid of him for that as well, you know. It reminds me of, what's his name, Rebetsky. Oh, my goodness, Rebetsky's hairline we cut last week. That was just disturbing. Charles Johnson, a different version of haircut, but just disturbing. But I think it's time. It's time to get rid of Charles Johnson. He can go fight in another organization and probably be very competitive, but in the flyweight division that's really growing, I don't think Charles Johnson belongs there. Moving up on my list, next up, we have Chad and Helliger. He lost to Jose Johnson. He got finished in the third round via rear naked choke. He's on a 2-fight losing streak. Lost to Alatong Haley in his last fight before this. He's 36 years old. He's just kind of one of those guys who is like, I don't even want to call him a journeyman because he doesn't even really have any good wins, you know? He came off of Dana White's Contender Series. He beat Jesse Strader. And since then, he's lost 2 fights. He's 36 years old. He really comes out and he fights the same way every single time. He doesn't seem to be much improved. And just being in your late 30s, you know, fighting in that weight class, it's hard. The lower the weight class, the more, you know, the lower the weight class, the less you can get away with age. You know, and at heavyweight, you can get away with being in your late 30s, even early 40s. The lower you get down in weight classes, the harder it is to succeed at such an age. So I really think it's time for Chad and Helliger to get cut. Moving up on the list, we have Lucy Pudilova. Disgraceful performance. Again, I've already talked about Aylin Perez. Aylin Perez is a garbage can, and she got dominated for 2 rounds by Aylin Perez. Got full mounted, wasn't even taking all that much damage, had nothing to offer. And honestly, I don't ever want to see her fight again. She's on a 2-fight losing streak. She lost to Jocelyn Edwards in the fight before this, which I think was controversial. It was a split decision. If I'm remembering correctly, that was a controversial decision. But she just, I mean, if you lose, Aylin Perez is the bottom of the barrel. Absolute bottom of the barrel. So for me, easy person to add to the list. Lucy Pudilova, 14-9. She's 29 years old, so maybe she can go improve and come back, but does anyone, I mean, I know the women's bantamweight division is garbage, but does anyone honestly, I can't wait to see that next Lucy Pudilova fight. I mean, I just wish they would put fights like this as early in the card as possible so I could literally skip them, because Pudilova's so low level, I don't ever want to see her fight again. And she almost pulled off a 3rd round comeback win, but Perez is garbage. So, you know, cut Lucy Pudilova. Moving up on the card, or not the card, moving up on the list. I'm so used to saying moving up on the card for the prediction videos. But we actually have kind of a historic cut here because we're going to cut two people at once. We're cutting Mick Parkin and Caio Machado, the heavyweight fight that Mick Parkin won on this card. Both of them are garbage. Both of them are garbage. Mick Parkin's 8-0, 28 years old. I mean, I don't know if he could even, I mean, he can't even beat Parker Porter. Parker Porter is the GOAT, but I'm just saying Mick Parkin, his striking isn't good. He doesn't have power. His grappling isn't that good. His jiu-jitsu isn't that good. I know he's 8-0, but he beat Jamal Pogues and Caio Machado. You know, in the Caio Machado fight, you could make an argument for Machado to win this fight. This was an ugly fight, and I knew this was going to be ugly. I knew this was going to be horrific when it was, you know, when I saw it on the card. And to be honest, I know the heavyweight division is the worst men's division in the UFC. They don't belong. They still don't belong. I mean, honestly, for Machado, he definitely deserves to be on this list. If you're losing to Mick Parkin, cut him. Jamal Pogues, I think he was probably on the cuts list for that card as well. I mean, Mick Parkin is not good. I know he's undefeated. He's not good. He's not good at all. I don't want to see him fight anymore. I don't want to see Caio Machado fight anymore. So literally cut them both. I never want to see either one of them fight again. Moving up on my list, and I'm kind of going rapid fire because I have so many cuts. But next on the list is Nicholas Mota. Nicholas Mota ended up in a no contest against Trey Ogden, but he should have lost the fight. Whether it be via decision, whether it be via arm triangle, he should have lost the fight. Referee error ended up with this being a no contest. But Nicholas Mota just isn't good. He isn't good. I thought he was better than he actually is, you know, going into this fight. But he lost to Manel Torres in his last fight, got brutalized there with a nasty elbow. He beat Cameron Van Camp, but Cameron Van Camp borderline doesn't belong in the UFC. He lost to Jim Miller. You know, this was literally February of 2022, so not that long ago. Jim Miller's on his way out. Jim Miller's getting old. I know he's been out there killing off, you know, up-and-coming prospects. But Nicholas Mota, he doesn't have the cardio. He doesn't have the striking. He doesn't have the grappling. And I just don't think, you know, it's just, I'm tired of the UFC hanging on to these Dana White's Contender Series guys just because, oh, they want to build up a guy who came off of Dana White's Contender Series. That's literally it. Nicholas Mota does not in any way, shape, or form belong in the UFC. Trey Ogden barely belongs. And Trey Ogden basically dominated him for the entire fight. So if you can't even have a competitive fight with Trey Ogden, then you probably deserve to be cut. And he should have gotten finished. He shouldn't have got a no contest. So therefore, he would have basically lost 3 out of his last 4. He would have got finished in all 3 of them. You know, his only win would have been against Cameron Van Camp. So, and if I remember, that fight was very competitive. So Nicholas Mota needs to be cut from the organization. Moving up on my list, next up, we have referee Mike Beltran. Mike Beltran needs to be cut. I mean, this was inexcusable. And I understand people make mistakes. This was inexcusable. Nicholas Mota, who we're just talking about, was in an arm triangle. Trey Ogden was applying an arm triangle. Nicholas Mota was using one of his hands to try to relieve the pressure of the arm triangle. And then the other arm is obviously in the arm triangle, which he's trying to relieve pressure as well. And literally Mike Beltran goes, show me something. Show me you're still there. How is he supposed to move his hands when he's defending the submission? So if he moves his hands to show you that he's still there, then he's going to get submitted. So you should have maybe grabbed his foot. You should have maybe looked at him. You should have checked body language a little bit more. I understand you're in a high pressure situation, but there is no reason that this should happen. Then on top of that, they rule it a no contest. And I actually like this. I actually like that they did something to overturn the bad decision. But the bad decision is now compounded by another bad decision because they should have went to the scorecards and made it a technical decision. So for those of you who don't know, if you get into the third round, from my understanding, if there's a weird wonky finish where the fight can't be resumed because of an eye poke or a cup shot or something along those lines, you can go to the judges' scorecards even though, you know, the fight didn't get completed. But you have most of the 3 rounds, so you can go to the judges' scorecards. They should have went to the judges' scorecards. Trey Ogden would have won, and therefore it would have been no harm, no foul. Nicholas Mota wouldn't have technically been finished, but he would have survived. He was going to lose the fight anyway. Obviously, there was only 2 minutes left. He was losing the 3rd round. I understand to a certain extent, maybe they were thinking, well, what if Nicholas Mota was winning and now you stop a fight early and then you hand his opponent a win? But I feel like Mike Beltran should have had the ability to go check with the judges, see what their scorecards were, and if the scorecards were in favor of Trey Ogden winning, they should have ruled it a technical decision. You know, I know that sounds complex, but imagine had Nicholas Mota won the first 2 rounds and then Trey Ogden puts on this submission in the 3rd, the ref stops it too early, and then they rule it in favor of the other guy who was losing or almost getting submitted in the 3rd round. That wouldn't make sense. So either way, I understand they're owning up to the mistake. He shouldn't have stopped it. Mota was not out. But first off, you should have checked his foot. You should have checked something else. And then second off, you should have ruled it a technical decision so Trey Ogden could get his win money. Because now half of his paycheck is cut in half. Because now he's not getting his win bonus. Fighters are paid show money and win money. Half and half. You know, if they're making $24,000, they're getting 12 and 12. So now Trey Ogden is missing out on half of his paycheck because Mike Beltran can't make a decent decision in the cage. And I know people are going to say, oh, well, people make mistakes. This is literally their job. Are they not training for 30 hours a week at least to make good decisions when they're reffing? You know what I mean? Like it's not like the only time they get any experience is when they're in the cage. They should be training this every single week. They should be putting in the hours to make good decisions. This was a horrific decision. And this isn't the first time stuff like this has happened. And this isn't the first time Mike Beltran's been involved with horrible decision making. So cut Mike Beltran. I know technically the UFC can't do it, but I want Mike Beltran gone. Moving up on my list, and this was a shoe-in for the cuts list. This is actually second to last. We have Nick Aguirre. Nick Aguirre is 7-2, and he loses against Peyton Talbot via rear naked choke. Nick Aguirre literally grappled for the entire first round. He dominated in the grappling, did 0 damage in the first round. Absolutely 0 damage. So he just held on. He just held on for dear life. He had the back for a little bit, did nothing. Then in the second round, he's completely gassed. He gets beat up in the second round, out-grappled in the second round, then finished in the third round via rear naked choke. He has no business in the UFC. He lost his last fight before this against Dan Argueta. The fight before that, it wasn't even in the UFC, so he's had 2 fights in the UFC. He's lost both of them. I'm actually shocked he didn't get finished by Dan Argueta. So I'm actually shocked by that. But either way, he's lost 2 fights. Peyton Talbot isn't that good. Talbot is not that good. He's coming off Dana White's Contender Series. He's 6-0 now, I believe. And he still has a lot to grow and a lot to build on his skill set. So it's not like it's some world beater, but Nick Aguirre is just and he quit in there. He did not want to be in there. He was completely gassed. He did not have any stamina at all after that first round. And he just said, you know what? I want out of here. I'm surprised he survived the second round, to be quite honest. And it's just such a, for these videos, and I've talked about it so many times, I don't mention it every single time now. But the reason I make these videos is not because I want to see anyone lose a job. It's because the barrier of entry into the UFC has dropped so low over the past, 4 or 5 years. At one point in time when I first started watching this sport, Nick Aguirre wouldn't even been close to a UFC fighter, let alone in the UFC. So he needs to be cut. The skill levels are not there. The striking's non-existent. The grappling's okay, but obviously it's not that good. The stamina isn't there. The jiu-jitsu isn't there. He's fighting a guy as green as Peyton Talbot, who's very young, who's inexperienced, and can't even do any damage on the ground when you have his back. Just disgraceful performance. Cut Nick Aguirre. Moving on to my last cut on the list, my number 1 cut, and this one's going to be super controversial. And I know people are going to be like, Joey, how could you do this? I don't care. Listen to what I have to say before you go down in the comment section and be like, how could you, Joey? My number 1 cut on the list is Brendan Allen. I want Brendan Allen cut immediately. I do not like Brendan Allen at all. And there's many reasons. And I'm going to point out to many reasons that literally happen at UFC Vegas 82. But we'll start off with this, something that happened, a month, 2 months ago. Brendan Allen tweeted out that he whoops his kids, okay? It was when that whole Neil Magny, Ian Gary thing was going on, and, Brendan Allen essentially tweeted out, I whoop my kids and nobody's going to do anything about it. I'll put the tweet up on the screen so you can read it for yourself in his own words. And I know people are going to be down in the comments like, he doesn't actually whoop his kids. Listen, we talked about recently about critical thinking. We talked recently about sources and where do you get the information? The information I am getting directly from Brendan Allen. Brendan Allen has told us directly that he whoops his kids. He has a 3-year-old daughter, and then I believe he has another daughter that is younger than his 3-year-old daughter. So I don't respect anyone putting their hands on their children, especially a 3-year-old child. If you disagree with that and you think it's okay for a grown man, a professional MMA fighter and grown man, to put his hands physically on a 3-year-old child, let me know down in the comments if you disagree with me. But then on top of that, you have Brendan Allen in the post-fight interview literally saying the word cum shot around his 3-year-old daughter. He's holding his 3-year-old daughter and saying the word cum shot. Disgusting, despicable. And I know people are going to say, oh, well, she doesn't understand. Dude, I don't care. That's weird. And then he's cussing. He's using the F word in front of her. Disgusting. And I understand his parenting is up to him. But that doesn't mean I can't have an opinion on it when it's broadcast live in public. If it's broadcast live in public, then I get to have an opinion on it. So he's cussing. He's using disgusting language in front of 3-year-old kids. You know, he's trotting her out there after in the last couple months, he's been bragging on social media about whooping her. So that's even more embarrassing. But then on top of that, the cherry on the top is just bringing her to the event in general. And I've been very consistent on this over the past 2 years. That's been well documented on video. I don't believe these fighters should be bringing their young children to the event. I understand Brendan Allen won. It was supposed to be a feel-good moment, him and his daughter in the cage afterwards. But what if he didn't win? What if he would have threw a leg kick, got checked by Paul Craig, and he snaps his leg in half? What if he gets brutally KO'd? I hate seeing that. We've seen it recently with Michelle Waterson. We've seen it in the past with Sam Alvey. Apparently, he loves torturing his young children. I don't believe you should be bringing young children to watch you compete in MMA just in case. I know these guys are confident, and I know this time it worked out. But I just don't think really, especially in that intimate setting of the Apex where there's not a lot of people, there's chances of you getting your ass whooped. There's chances of a horrific injury. And you're bringing your kid there for her to see that, if that potentially happens. It's just, I think it's disgraceful. And I really think there should be some rule in place. I don't know what the rule should be just yet, but there should be some rule in place because I'm really sad when we see something like that. You know, the Michelle Waterson stuff, when you see your kid crying. I remember, I think Kamaru Usman, who has a little bit older children, she was crying when he got knocked out. I believe that was back when Leon Edwards knocked him out, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, I think it's disgraceful. But you put all those things together, using foul language, bragging about beating his daughter on social media who's 3 years old, and then on top of that, you add the layer of you shouldn't really be bringing kids to the fights, especially when they're that young. I just think Brendan Allen needs to be cut. And then on top of that, in the post-fight press conference, or not even the press conference, I'm sure he did it in the press conference too, but in the post-fight interview where he's cussing in front of his 3-year-old daughter and using the word cum shot, he's saying he deserves a #1 contender fight. He's saying he deserves a #1 contender fight. Let's go over his recent wins. He beat the dead body of Paul Craig. He beat the dead body of Bruno Silva. He beat the dead body of Andre Muniz. Now in his defense, the Andre Muniz win at the time wasn't as bad. But either way, these are okay wins at best. Paul Craig needs to retire. Obviously, I already put him on this list. He's calling for a #1 contender fight after beating Paul Craig. Does anyone honestly think Paul Craig is even a top-ranked fighter? I don't think so. If anybody believes that, they're delusional. So he's saying #1 contender fight. He needs to fight at least, I would say, 1 or 2 more times to even be considered in a #1 contender fight. He would have to fight someone looking at like number 5 to 8, win that fight. I think he might be ranked like number 9 right now. He has to fight like a Paulo Costa or something like that. Then maybe after that, he can be in a #1 contender fight if he wins that fight dominantly. But then on top of that, I'll add another reason to it. He turned down Roman Dolidze. He turned down Roman Dolidze, who was ranked way ahead of him, and instead to take on Paul Craig. So he turned down a guy who was ahead of him just so he could fight Paul Craig instead. You add all these things together, cut Brendan Allen immediately. And if you disagree with any of these reasons, let me know why. I'm genuinely curious. If you want to defend a man who brags on social media about putting his hands on a 3-year-old child, let me know down in the comments. But that's pretty much all I have for you. That's all the cuts. There's other fighters on the card I could have cut. But that's my cuts for UFC Vegas 82. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.